So I'm here today with Dr. Alan Bleakley from the Plymouth University. We just finished a very interesting symposium on activity theory in medical education. So Alan, could you tell us in very simple words so that we're all on the same page, what is activity theory in the context of MedEd?
Sure. So we would have to go back to the kinds of theories that you would normally get from North America and Canada, for example, are about individuals learning. Mm-hmm. And that's partly about the history of doctors as heroic individuals. Mm-hmm. So you take responsibility for your own learning, and it's your own agency which does the work. If you grew up in Soviet Russia, you would have a completely different view of what learning is about. Because the ideology would be not of the heroic individual, but of the collective. Mm-hmm. So your idea of learning would be always about collaboration with other people in a social project in which you take your part in society in the social project. So learning theory in America and Europe largely stuck with this individualistic approach in which you take responsibility and you learn about stuff and it gets in your head, and then you bring that stuff out somewhere else. In Soviet Russia and satellites, you would learn about the collectivity. So after the Russian Revolution in 1917, you would learn about what it is to be in a collective. So one particular person called Lev Vygotsky was a psychologist who was very interested in education. Lev Vygotsky was influenced obviously by this ideology, or was part of this ideology, and thought about learning in a much wider way than just storing stuff inside mm-hmm. yourself as an individual. So learning was about being in a collective. So you always learn with other people, but you also, within dialectical materialism, which is what Marx talked about in the Communist Manifesto, dialectical materialism, is that you also operate with objects in the world. The material world is very important to you, mm-hmm. and those objects can obviously be traded or exchanged to become part of the commerce and the economy of this group of people working together. So part of those objects is, what do you learn with in terms of artifacts and objects? Well, in our day, of course, the big learning artifact is the computer, mm-hmm. And programming and so forth. In Vygotsky's day, the big learning artifact would be pen and paper and books. So learning theories, a social learning theory started to develop in which the objects that you worked with and the collective were in a conversation. And you would develop that into activities that drew in a larger and larger number of people, a larger and larger collective, to work through problems or issues. So the activity is something that you do. It's not just a single act in which, or an action in which I pick up a cup or something. It's the whole activity in which I pick up the cup, talking to you, thinking about the environment.
There's a context.
There's a whole context to this. And you must embrace the context and see what the meaning of that context is. But also, how do you benefit and move forward that context for innovation?
Yeah, and how it influences other people, I
Absolutely,
guess.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's seems like a very humanistic approach as well.
Yeah.
And about humanities in terms of teaching medicine. I have a feeling that perhaps it's a topic which is not being covered widely enough in medical school these days. So are you also interested in that, right?
Yes. So I mean, the reason for that again is historical. So you think about, where is this Soviet learning theory going to go? People from North America didn't visit the Soviet Union during the time of the Iron Curtain. Mm-hmm. It's very rare for scholars to go across. Some people did, very few people did, and came back with these ideas about collective learning theories. But where would this go? Well, it crossed the border from Russia into Finland. So you've got people in Finland who became very interested in this. And one of those people, if we shoot forward right through into the 1960s, late 1960s and early 1970s, was Ulrike Engström. And Engström was a person who immediately grasped the significance of this concept of learning socially and learning through activity. And his great contribution to this was, if we think about the relationship between artifacts and this social learning group that's expanding all the time, how does this develop particular roles within a community? How do we think about division of labour within a community? So if we take a community like medicine, for example, how can we help the learning process by taking on specific roles that stimulate learning in a way in which we gain a particular kind of expertise that adds into the collective? So I mean, my background is originally in zoology and biology, but then I moved into psychology. So I've got my own particular learning as a psychologist and as a psychotherapist, but I don't know anything about pediatrics. So how would I talk to a pediatrician about the psychological value of his or her work? So the whole idea of an activity theory is you don't stay in your silo as the pediatrician or the psychologist. You come together and you discuss the context of the learning and how you can learn from each other and how that can be spread. And that's called expansion of learning.
Well, I think it's a very difficult thing, as I observe how difficult it is often for doctors or for healthcare professionals to communicate with each other, even within the same hospitals or the same teams. It's very difficult, and I'll keeping my fingers crossed for this also to change. Perhaps, what's your opinion on this? Perhaps like through some common classes for students from nursing, from medical studies, from dentistry, like like putting the groups of students together. To help them, to allow them to interact at a very early stage of education, medical education. Perhaps that would be helpful in the future to help them communicate as a fully grown members of the teams in the future. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so that's really important. So lots of medical schools are doing interprofessional learning, or they have a year prior to medical school in which you decide on your profession after you've done this formative year, where you mix with other people, and then some become nurses, some become doctors, some go on to be medical students rather, or nursing students, some become social workers, and so on. So you mix together, and there's interchange. But what's missing from that is the practicalities of bringing people together and them deciding on a career is easy to solve. What's missing is the theory of how those people should learn together. So imagine that you have this idea of a collective of people coming together to learn together as an interprofessional group, and the focus is on building up teams in the future who are interprofessional.
That's the purpose.
And we know from the evidence base that teams that work well together interprofessionally have better patient outcomes. So it's good to get interprofessional learning. But what if you've got that idea and you've, for example, got this old style learning theory about individuals learning like this and keeping their ideas hidden from others.
It's completely different from what we're expecting.
So you get a tension there. So you have to have a learning theory which complements this structure that you're trying to build up. So social learning theories, of which activity theory is a part, try and look at the whole social group and how knowledge within that group can expand.
I was wondering about when you mentioned the computer as an artifact. I got a question. I got curious about how do you think perhaps this theory or the practical side of this theory, the implementation, is changing in the times of modern technologies, where we have so many different artifacts, I guess, and they are always changing and faster and faster. How, looking at your work, years of work, how do you also see the influence of technology of what you studied?
Yes, it's changing everything dramatically, because the whole idea of what in activity theory is talked about as not working with a K. So the not working is you come together with somebody in a team which is and it's temporary. This exchange is temporary. And you exchange ideas or information, and then you go away. So you form a knot, and then you undo the knot.
Yeah.
Yes. So we do that with social media. We do that now through technology all the time. We're constantly forming these meshes and knots. We're constantly networking with each other, and we're constantly forming communities that come and go in and out of focus. But the issue with that is authenticity. In a hospital setting or in a clinic setting, when you receive information from somebody, say about a patient, you have to make sure that that information is correct and authentic. You have to trust that the person has passed the right kind of information to you. So the problem with the development of social media is the whole business of fabrication of an authenticity. Is so much of the information is disinformation or misinformation.
And it's like produced on purpose.
Yes.
There is some
Absolutely.
interest to produce it,
Yes.
misinformation.
Which is a very interesting social phenomenon,
Yeah.
but very dangerous in terms of making potential errors within healthcare and medicine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Alan. Thanks for your time.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
It's been a great pleasure.
Great. Thank you.